Transformation, if we could sort of give a little bit of a technical definition of that, we talk about translation being sort of any change that occurs at whatever level or state you're at, and transformation is some sort of vertical move up. Now, it's generally the case that if we're talking about transformation on a broad sense, transformation is a relatively slow process. Now, we're not talking about peak experiences or altered states or stuff like that. We're talking about any developmental sequence. Robert Kegan estimates, and this is just a broad estimate, that it takes an average of about 5 years for an adult to transform one full stage in any of the major developmental sequences, whether it's Jane Lovinger's or Lawrence Kohlberg's or Robert Kegan's and so on. So usually I'm going to qualify this in a moment, usually therapists don't see major transformation. Now, like I say, I'll qualify that because I know some of you are going, wait a minute, I will qualify that because there are a couple of ways that does happen. But generally what happens is in the therapeutic situation, somebody comes in, and just for the sake of argument, for developmental scales, let's just use the 7 chakras and just use 7 stages, and you can sort of fill them in roughly. It's what you imagine they mean from the material. Level 1, chakra 2 is emotional sexual, 3 is ego power, etc. So generally people come in at whatever stage they're at, stage 3 or stage 4. And what therapy does, particularly briefer forms of therapy, it does 2 things. One, it helps people translate in a healthier way at whatever level they're at. And there are many, many ways to do that, and we can talk about some of those. The simplest way to define health at any one stage or level is that it balances the 4 quadrants at that level. So we can switch into spiral dynamics, you can be at the blue meme or mythic membership or a conformist stage of development, and a lot of clients are, but they're not balancing I and we and it very well. So if you give too much emphasis to I on any level and not enough to we or it, then obviously a little bit too self-centered, you're neglecting relationships in we, or you're neglecting it in work and so on. Other people can give too much emphasis to it and not enough to I, and you have to say, wait a minute, we really need to work on your self-esteem and et cetera. And then some, particularly women, are more prone to maybe give too much emphasis to we, to the relationships, and maybe not enough to their own self-interest and so on. And men sometimes give so much interest to it, to the work objects and all that, they neglect the I and the we. And so a lot of what happens with very, very good therapy, particularly brief therapy, is you just take people where you find them and you make them healthier at the stage they're at. Now, it can be interrupted, so to speak, and often is, by peak experiences that have a kind of a transformative flavor. It's a higher state is glimpsed. And these happen often, these happen frequently, and they're very, very, very important. They don't necessarily constitute permanent transformation. But we'll come back to those peak experiences in a minute. But again, they're generally not a move up. If you're at blue, it's not generally a move up to orange or green or yellow or something like that. Because again, that might take 5 or more years. There's one important type of, we call it a mini transformation. And this happens a lot in therapy. And that is, depending on, we can discuss the actual genesis of certain types of psychopathologies. But one of the major ones, looking from a developmental point of view, is that as the young infant and child is developing through the earlier stages of development, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, talking about those in abstract kind of terms, if there's a component of the self that's not integrated at those stages, if it's repressed or alienated or split off, or there's a harsh internal superego, or the culture that it finds itself in won't let it befriend these impulses in itself, or so on, then those get split off and remain at a lower level of development, and they actually almost retain all of the flavor and characteristics that they had when they were split off. So if you split off, if you're at age 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 and you're splitting off components of yourself, they retain your little sub-personalities are 5 years old or 6 years old or 7 years old. And we see these not only in clients, but the example I always use is go home to your family at Christmas each year. out comes your 7-year-old, you know. I mean, you think you're doing fine. Your mom says, have we put on weight? And you, boom, out comes a 7-year-old girl, you know. So what happens in therapy with those is your actual center of gravity, you might have pushed up, you know, into stage 5 or 6 on a 7th stage, and the little subpersonality is still split off at stage 2. When you contact that and befriend it, it will rise up to stage 5 or 6 where you are. So it's actually transforming 3 or 4 stages very quickly. So now your center of gravity hasn't actually gone higher, but your little subpersonalities and symptoms, they're all transforming. So that is kind of a transformative. It's very important. It's a very important part of what happens in the therapeutic process. And I believe it happens whether you have that understanding of development or not. And we'll come back to that again. There are many, many ways to treat dysfunctions and pathologies and so on. You don't have to have these conceptual understandings. Now, I believe that the integral understanding is the most accurate understanding we have on the development of pathologies, because it includes all the various components from physiological to cultural and social and so on. But even somebody that just says, let's do cognitive therapy, or even somebody who does Gestalt and says, we don't care how it started, let's just pay attention to your present feelings. In effect, the same thing is going to happen, because once you start paying attention to the present, then these subpersonalities are going to start forcing their way into the present. And as long as you stay with that, you're in a sense going to befriend them, and then they're going to move up in their own, they're going to have a miniature transformation and rejoin consciousness at its highest average level right there. So those are transformative events that tend to happen in the therapeutic process. Probably one of the reasons that we don't see let's say, again, if somebody comes into therapy and they're at stage 5 on a 7-stage scale, usually we don't see major transformation upward from there into stage 6 or stage 7 for 2 reasons. One, it's the amount of time. And the other is usually what tends to happen is that you need to do some form of awareness training once or twice a day to be strong enough to start that transformative process going. And if you see a therapist once or twice a week, it's just usually not quite enough. So that's almost the only reason that the therapeutic process itself doesn't do more transformation. It's just it takes a daily dose of this stuff. And so that's one of the reasons that meditation is almost the only thing that we have a lot of empirical data on, that it will move an adult an average of about 2 stages vertically over about a 3 or 4 year period if it's done consistently. That's not to say that other types of techniques won't, but we don't have any direct evidence on that. We don't have any studies on that. And I think there are several that are out there, but there's no studies so far really conclusively demonstrating that. So yes, I've done therapy, had it done to me, drive-by shootings, prolonged, brief, etc. Breakthrough experiences are what are wonderful during the therapeutic process. I think one of the things that, particularly in this era of insurance-driven, brief therapy that demands upper right quadrant scientific proof that something's happening, and we all know what we're talking about, don't we? There's this big battle going on between upper right and upper left. And upper right is show me behavioral techniques, make it fast, show a scientific change, medicate the hell out of it, prove to me you're doing something, and then I, the insurance company, will pay for that treatment. Upper left, gaining insight, awareness, getting in touch with the deepest dimensions of you. The hell with you. That don't count, no insurance. So there's this big battle going on between upper right and upper left. And I think one of the things that an integral approach does is it says, okay, there's a place for all of those. And if we're going to have to play the insurance game and give some sort of upper right quadrant stuff, that's fine, we'll work with that. But there's always going to be a place for the primary aim of therapy, which is to help a human being understand themselves, get in touch with the deepest part of themselves, understand their own soul, and befriend that and come to terms with it. It's really a midwifing process for the soul in so many ways, and having people fundamentally touch the deepest, realest part of them, and to do so in the eyes of an other human being. And that's very, very, very important. And that doesn't fit well on an insurance form.